And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Marcus Rediker, the current Daiho Chun Chair in the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa, who will speak today on the Afterlives of Benjamin Lay in biography, play, graphic novel, children's book, and documentary film. He is Distinguished Professor of Atlantic History at the University of Pittsburgh, and I would also mention the preeminent historian of maritime slavery. He is the author of 15 books, including The Slave Ship, A Human History, 2007, and the forthcoming Freedom Ship, The Uncharted History of Escaping Slavery by Sea, which will be published by Viking Penguin in May of 2025. He produced a prize-winning documentary film, Ghosts of Amistad, 2013, directed by Tony Buba, and a prize-winning play, The Return of Benjamin Lay, co-written with Naomi Wallace. Keep that one in mind. An authority on pirates and many other waterborne types, his Histories from Below have won numerous awards and appeared in 20 languages. The Many-Headed Hydra, The Hidden History of the Revolutionary Atlantic, co-written with Peter Lindbaugh, is widely recognized as a classic of such history. Today's talk is the first of 3 major public presentations, which I will call your attention to now. This Sunday, November 3rd at 2:00 p.m. in the Art Auditorium here on the UH Mānoa campus, we'll all have the great opportunity to see The Return of Benjamin Lay, starring the actor Mark Povinelli. Co-sponsored by the Center for Biographical Research, the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series, the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters, and the Departments of American Studies, English, Theater, and Dance, this dramatic reading of the play about one of the most remarkable 18th century revolutionaries and abolitionists will be performed by Mark Povinelli, the star of its smash London premiere. Because the talk today will tell you a great deal about who Benjamin Lay is, and I strongly suspect make this Sunday a must-see performance, I will only add that admission is free, parking on campus is free, and a talkback featuring Marcus Rediker and Mark Povinelli, moderated by Laura Lyons, will follow the performance. Registration is advised but not required. As of this morning, close to 200 people have signed up, and the Art Auditorium seats 300. To sign up, go to the speaker's site at manoahawaii.edu. Then, on Thursday, November 7th, also at the Art Auditorium at 6:30 p.m., Marcus will give a talk on Resistance to Tyrants, A Long History of Hope, which will be timely regardless of the results of next Tuesday. Chuck Lawrence, one of the founders of critical race theory and professor emeritus of the William S. Richardson School of Law at UH Mānoa, will moderate. This talk is part of the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series, primarily sponsored by the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters. Again, admission is free, though not necessary to attend. To register, go to manoa.hawaii.edu/speakers. Regarding his talk today, I will only add that you will be impressed as impressed as I am by his scholarly versatility. And Chuck Lawrence just walked in the room. Hi, Chuck. Go back on this. Regarding his talk today, I will only add that you will be as impressed as I am by his scholarly versatility, deploying different methods and skills to reach different audiences at different ages, in different environments, representing different demographics through different media. Scholarly relevance beyond the crumbling ivy tower? Marcus walks the walk. Marcus Rediker.
Greetings, everybody. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. I did see several. I am filled with gratitude to be here again, to be speaking in this series, thanks to Craig. I'm especially thrilled that we will have the reading of the play. I personally didn't think it was possible, but when Jeanette Heronico introduced me to Craig, I realized that with Craig, all things are possible. He has worked unbelievably hard to make this happen. So I'm picking up our actor at the airport tomorrow. We'll practice and get ready for Sunday. So That is a real thrill for me. So I'm happy to have a chance to talk with you about Benjamin Lay. And I just want to introduce him to you this way. Benjamin Lay, in 1738, 1738, he was a Quaker. He went to a big Quaker meeting in Burlington, New Jersey. This was the annual yearly meeting where Quakers came from all around Philadelphia to talk about their business. A lot of Quakers owned enslaved people at this time. You need to know that, because we think of Quakers as having been abolitionists forever. They weren't. They weren't. And Benjamin Lay was determined that they were going to be abolitionists. So here is this poor man, had hardly any education, born under humble circumstances in Essex, England. He'd been a sailor, sailed around the world. That's actually very important to know. Also important to know that he had dwarfism. He was about 4 feet tall. He also had kyphosis, which is the over-curvature of the thoracic vertebrae. So he had a hunchback. He would, I guess, by contemporary standards, be considered disabled, but I have no evidence that he ever thought of himself that way. So Benjamin decides that he's going to go to this meeting, and he walks 22 miles to get there, because he thought that for him to ride a horse would be unfair to the horse. I'm serious, this was his reasoning. So he makes it to the meeting, and he prepares, what shall we say, a special presentation. Before entering the meeting house, he had dressed up in a military uniform. Okay? Now remember, Quakers are pacifists. Had been since 1660, so this is a provocation right off the bat. But he goes further. He has a belt to which he attaches a sword. He takes a book, you know those books that have the carved out secret compartments? He takes an animal bladder and he fills it up with bright red pokeberry juice, ties it off, puts it in the book, closes the book, and then throws an overcoat over his shoulders so no one can see how he's dressed. They can't see the uniform, the sword, the book. They can't see anything. So he goes to the meeting and he sits in a place where a lot of the so-called weighty Quakers would sit. They're the powerful Quakers. They're the wealthy Quakers. They are the slave-owning Quakers. And you may know, are there any Quakers here by any chance? Quakers don't have ministers. They have a very egalitarian structure, so people speak as the Spirit moves them. And Benjamin waited patiently, and he was a man of the Spirit. So he stood up, and he announced that slave owning is the greatest sin in the world. People expected him to say that. They had known that he had committed his life to the cause of abolition. And then he threw off the overcoat, and an audible gasp fills the room. And he takes out the book, holds it above his head, and pulls out the sword, and then says, he had a big booming voice, even though he's very small, he said, "God will take vengeance against those who oppress their fellow creatures." And he runs the sword through the book, and the blood comes gushing down his arm. So then he walks over and sprinkles the blood on the heads of the enslavers, just in case everybody hadn't gotten the point, right? And total pandemonium breaks out. He goes back to the room and he just holds the book, and the blood is seeping and dripping. And one observer said he stood there still as a statue. And this chaos is engulfing him. Well, several nonviolent Quakers rushed in, picked him up, and threw him out the door, hoping to be done with him. But he wasn't done with them yet. He comes back, and he lies down at the main entrance to the meeting house so that they're going to have to step over his body when they leave. That's called putting your body on the line, right? He had a small body, but he used it to very good effect. Okay, so this is Benjamin Lay's guerrilla theater, and I don't mean the animal, I mean guerrilla as in guerrilla war. He's waging a guerrilla war against enslavers to humiliate them in public. Now, I want you to note, this event happened in 1738. There is no organized anti-slavery movement yet. There is resistance being waged by enslaved people, who are always the first abolitionists, but he's 2 generations ahead of his time. 1780s and 1790s, such a movement will take shape. So Benjamin Lay is a very radical abolitionist, but I want you to know that he's more than that. He was a revolutionary in every sense. I've been studying radicals my whole life. I think he had the most completely revolutionary worldview I have ever come across. And here's what it consisted of, okay? He was not just an abolitionist. He also believed and advocated equality of class, equality of gender. He believed in environmental protection. He said famously, "Beware rich men who poison the earth for gain." Now, I thought I heard somebody say that last week. Right? You're talking about almost 300 years ago. Environmental protection. He is also a champion of animal rights. Hence, he's not going to exploit a horse by making it carry him to the meeting. He was a vegan 200 years before that word was invented. So you can see this man had applied radicalism to all parts of his life, and he lived that way. You know, the Quakers had a phrase that said, "Let your life speak." You must live a virtuous life. He took that to an extreme because he lived in a cave. Anything else was too luxurious. He grew all of his own food. He made his own clothes. You know why he did those things? Because he didn't want to be involved in the market, which exploits people. When you buy something, the crafty art of buying and selling, you're buying something made with someone else's labor. And he understood this first and foremost in terms of the slave system. He understood that the commodity form hid the exploitation that created it. And the perfect example of this was sugar. Abolitionists would say sugar is made with blood, the blood of enslaved Africans. So Benjamin Lay pioneers a kind of politics of consumption. He's one of the first to figure this out. He refused to have anything to do with sugar, with tea, with anything that was produced by this kind of labor exploitation. He was arguably, I would say clearly, the main figure in getting Quakers to abolish slavery in their own ranks. That wouldn't happen until after he died, but the first step was taken the year before he died. By the way, he was born in 1682, died in 1759, lived a long life, 77 years. But a year before he died, thanks in large part to his efforts, Quakers said that people who were involved in the slave trade could not be a member of the community, would be disowned for that. But see, Benjamin Lay was himself disowned by Quakers for his anti-slavery radicalism. He was disowned by 4 different Quaker congregations. He was the most disowned man in the 18th century. You know, and he wouldn't quit because he was sure that he was right. So, Quakers, as I'm sure all of you know, went on to be very important to the subsequent anti-slavery movement. Okay, so Benjamin had a lot to do with getting the Quakers to abolish slavery and with forming other groups in England and the United States to take on the slave trade and slavery as institutions. Okay, so, now what I've just told you, don't you think this man sounds rather important? As an example, as an activist, as a fighter? He's almost completely unknown. Now, before this talk, or maybe something I wrote, how many people in here had never heard of Benjamin Lay? A lot of people, okay. Well, there are reasons for that, okay? And the culprits are the Quakers, on the one hand, and modern historians on the other. The Quakers, like I say, disowned him. They tried to suppress his activism. They did everything they could. They threw him out of meetings. He kept coming back. They were the original people who sought to silence Benjamin Lay. They failed, but they tried. And now along come historians, historians of abolition. And they tend to leave Benjamin out because he's from the wrong class. He's got the wrong kind of body. His methods are too extreme. See, the story historians wanted to tell for the longest time was that the abolition movement came out of the Enlightenment by cultured gentlemen who decided that it was unreasonable. Well, Benjamin Lay comes before the Enlightenment, and he had figured out that it was a lot more than unreasonable. He advocated immediate worldwide emancipation of all enslaved people. Okay, a century before that idea made William Lloyd Garrison famous, the leader of American abolitionism in the 19th century. Lay was onto this a century earlier. Okay, you want to know how bad it is with historians? Probably the most famous historian of abolition, anytime and anywhere, is a man named David Bryan Davis. Taught at Yale University for many years, passed away a couple of years ago. I want to quote him on Benjamin Lay. Benjamin Lay was, according to David Bryan Davis, quote, a demented little hunchback. Yeah, the shock on this woman's face. I was shocked too when I read it. That quote hasn't aged very well, has it? Okay, so historians have a lot to do with this. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with Benjamin Lay's story, and in this respect, from the very first time I began to work on this book, I realized this book was going to have a slightly different goal than my other books. My other books are basically written for activists who want to change things, but this book has a different goal. I want to change public consciousness about Benjamin Lay. How to do that? That's hard to do, but how can you do that? I decided, well, over the last 10 years trying to answer that question, I decided that I would undertake a juggernaut, a Ben Lay juggernaut, and do one project after another project after another project, and that's what you see here on the screen. And by the way, here is the man himself. Not applicable. Caroline, can you help me?
Yeah.
The arrows aren't working.
Yeah, if you just click the...
Okay, got it. Okay. Here he is. 4 feet tall. You can't really see the hunchback. You can see the spindly legs. I've talked with Mark Poganelli about what kind of dwarfism Benjamin Lay had. There are about 200 different varieties. It's not achondroplasia, which is the most common type. And you see some symbols of his vegetarianism here. You see the stones, that's the entrance to his cave in Abington, Pennsylvania. But you have to imagine him in a military uniform with a sword. And you notice nothing in this image, which was, by the way, painted, commissioned by Deborah Franklin, the wife of Benjamin Franklin. Nothing in this image says anything about slavery, because he was still too controversial. Still too controversial. Okay, so why do this? In other words, why undertake all these projects about Benjamin Lay? I have three basic reasons. One, to understand his life, his very complicated life, to understand his impact in his own times, and to try to understand what he might mean to us today. That's the first reason. The second is to correct the injustice of the suppression of his memory. Now, it's not just that people forgot. They actively tried to bury him. And you know when he was forgotten? He was actually well known during the abolition period because several leading abolitionists wanted to point to him as an ancestor of their movement. But after the Civil War, with the rise of white supremacy, guess who got buried? Any abolitionist hero, right? So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that I do think his was an exemplary life. And it teaches us something about how you can live with commitment to your principles. A lot of people, when I tell the story of Benjamin Lay, they would have thought that such a collection of beliefs wouldn't have been possible until the 1970s. Right? Anti-capitalist, anti-slavery, feminist, environmentalist, vegetarian, animal rights supporter. Well, folks, that's 300 years ago and we still haven't caught up. So I think that's another very important reason. We need Benjamin Lay for the future. Okay, so now I want to talk about the different projects that I've undertaken. Okay, here's the book. I actually first met Benjamin Lay in the 1990s when Peter Linebaugh and I were writing a book that Craig mentioned called The Many-Headed Hydra. We were studying the question whether slave revolts advanced abolitionist thinking, or abolitionists watching the resistance on the ground and responding to that, and of course they were. And Benjamin Lay wrote his book. It's a very strange book, I'm going to say more about it a little bit later, called All Slave Keepers That Keep the Innocent in Bondage, Apostates. Okay? Now that's a mouthful of a title, but what he meant was, you can't be an enslaver and be a Christian. It's forbidden. Okay? But he wrote this book. I read it. I'm convinced that most of the historians who write it, 2 sentences about Benjamin Lay, they haven't read it. They don't really know what it says. And I can see why. It's a hard book to read. But yes, he was paying attention to the revolts that were going on in the 1730s. But the more I read about him, the more I realized this guy deserves his own book. He doesn't deserve to be 2 pages in the middle of a 400-page book. He deserves his own book. So I just put him aside. And then I wrote other books, and then finally in 2013, I decided that I would come back to Benjamin Lay. I felt like the world needed an intellectual like Benjamin Lay, someone who was going to put his beliefs into action. So 2013, I went back to the research, did research in Quaker records. Quakers are such great record keepers, and I love them for this. And in Essex, England, where Benjamin lived many years of his early life, I went to the Quaker records with great excitement. And guess what? I found a big fat file that was labeled Benjamin Lay. From all the times they had had problems with him, they had put them all in the same folder, right? Here was Benjamin Lay, this troublesome, he was an impossible man. Okay, so I went back, I did all this research. I ended up writing what I would call this book is kind of an intellectual history from below. A history of an ordinary person, right? He was in no way a working class man, worked as a sailor for many years, but it's possible to reconstruct how his mind works. And the reason his mind is important was that he made this breakthrough in thinking that so few other people managed to do, ever. At a time when slavery seemed one of the most natural institutions on earth, he decided that it was wrong and had to be abolished immediately. So one of the big quests of the book is to explain how that happened. What was it about his experience and the evolution of his thinking that led him to that really unusual conclusion? So the book is all about his historical importance. I think that I did establish that in the book. I was determined to write a short book about a short man. But it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. My motto in this was a famous line by Pascal, who wrote to a correspondent and said, "Pardon my long letter. If I'd had more time, I would have written a shorter one." And I find that that is true. So I put this book through 12 drafts. 12 drafts. And finally got down, I think, to the essence of the story. Now, there is one very important thing about this book, which I think hasn't been fully appreciated yet, but a number of people have gotten it. Benjamin Lay was the contemporary of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, James Madison, and many of the founding fathers. And one of the many excuses made on behalf of the founding fathers, our deeply flawed national heroes, was that, quote, everybody thought that way back then. No, they didn't. They did not, and I can prove it. I wrote this book to prove it. Radical abolitionism was available at that time. Now, I can't prove that Jefferson or Washington had read Benjamin Lay's book, but I suspect they did. I suspect they knew about it. Now, there have been some unusual and to me, very satisfying developments in the aftermath of publishing this book. Shortly after I finished it, I went to the Abington Quaker meeting in Pennsylvania, the last group to disown Benjamin Lay. And I gave a talk about Benjamin Lay, and my final words to them were these: "You disowned him, you've got to take him back." And it caused a furor, a sort of an uproar within the Quaker meeting. And they put the issue aside for discernment, as they say. And then they invited me back a year later, and I saw that everything had changed. So they actually decided, by consensus, as Quakers do, that they re-embraced the radical spirit of Benjamin Lay, that the Quakers who disowned him were wrong, and that he was right. I was so happy, because it meant a lot to him, being a Quaker. We also got a historical marker very near where his cave is. Read that. So I see all these things as steps coming back to public memory. The other three Quaker groups that had disowned him followed suit. And the last one was the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, which was the bastion of all of his enemies. So they've all taken him back now, and I'll just give you one example. The Friends meeting in London, the headquarters really of Quakerism worldwide, the biggest organization, they have now renamed the William Penn Room the Benjamin Lay Room. Wow. Because William Penn was an enslaver. On 12 people. So the word is getting out there. Okay, so this is the first project. In 2017, well actually 2015, I was in Medford, Oregon with my friend Naomi Wallace, a very distinguished playwright. And we were there for the opening of a play that she wrote called The Liquid Plain. This is a play about the slave trade, which is based on a story in my book, The Slave Ship: Human History. And I had been Naomi's historical consultant. I didn't do any of the writing, but she wrote. She really cares about history. So we're sitting in a little cafe outside, near the theater, and she said, "What are you writing right now?" I said, "I'm writing this book about Benjamin Lay." "Oh, who's that?" And so I told her kind of the story I just told you, and she said, "As soon as you finish that book, we're going to write a play about him." Now, I didn't believe her. I didn't think it would ever happen. But it did finally happen. She was fascinated by his theatricality. Benjamin Lay was very theatrical. I mean, as you can imagine, the sprinkling of the blood. You know, he wanted people to debate the things that he did. And some people hated him, and some people loved him, but everybody talked about him. So Naomi and I are invited to give a lecture in Berlin at the House of World Cultures on the theme of what happens after the nation state. This is for you, Nandita. But we got into a fight with the curators because we decided that in our lecture what we wanted to do was to speak for 30 minutes and then have an actor dressed as Benjamin Lay come out and disrupt the whole proceeding. And at first they loved the idea, but when it came time to hire a little person actor, they got very nervous. And I'm talking about this with LP activists. And they're saying, "Doesn't surprise me. We make people very nervous." So finally, this conflict reached such a boiling point that they said, "We withdraw our support for that part of your presentation." We said, "You don't tell us what we do and don't present. That's our decision. You invite us to give a lecture, we'll present what we want, and in fact, you already approved it." And they said no, and we said, we quit. We resign in protest because of your prejudice against little people actors. And you could hear the stereotypes kicking around in the things that they wrote us. Right? They could not imagine a little person actor as anything other than slapstick humor, or the Munchkins, or one of the 7 dwarfs. They couldn't imagine it. So we withdrew in protest. So this play has its origins in protest. I imagine that the banner should say, a little scroll above the top, "Banned in Berlin." Something like that. So we, but suddenly, Naomi and I had a free long weekend. She lives in England, so I flew over to England. We spent 3 days. The resistance we got from these people in Berlin made us realize we were on the right track, and that this was something we really needed to do, that we needed to confront all this. So in those 3 days, we hashed out the foundation of the play. And it took a long time to do it. We completed the draft. It took about 2 years. We had readings. We had one in New York, one in London, one in Paris. We were very close to getting a booking in New York when COVID hit. And of course, that just demolished the theater industry. So when we came out the other end, we started off with a new director whose name is Ron Daniels, a Shakespeare expert, really a seriously accomplished man. And we had the world premiere of the play in June 2023. We've done readings like the one we're going to do on Sunday, and now the play will have full runs in Pittsburgh, New York, and Philadelphia in the first 6 months of 2025. So if any of you are on the East Coast and available, be happy to see you there. Here's Mark Povinelli. I will pick Mark up at the airport tomorrow morning. And he really was an extraordinarily powerful figure on the stage. Here's another scene from this is a moment in the play or the reading when Benjamin Lay is thinking about the death of his wife, Sarah Lay, who was also a little person. Okay, so that's the second big project, and then comes the graphic novel. Started working on this in 2018 with the assistance of a longtime friend of mine named Paul Buell. Paul is a historian who was one of the founders of Radical America in 1969, one of the first radical history journals. And Paul did, from the very early days, a special issue on radical comics. He was one of the first to kind of be interested in this, but there were lots of countercultural artists who were fascinated by this art form. So through Paul, I met David Lester. And David is a Vancouver-based artist. I read the book that he had produced just before I began to work with him. It was a graphic history of the 1919 general strike in Winnipeg, in Canada. I thought, this is my kind of artist. So he understood the history from below angle right away because he has very similar political commitments. Now, here's an example of the art. David is not your customary graphic novelist. His work has been strongly influenced by German expressionism, different kinds of art that's been done and movements from below. He's just extraordinary in terms of his ability to think through how something can be represented through this medium. I'm happy to say that since we did this one, we've now done 2 more graphic novels, a second one on pirates, a third one coming out in about 10 days on the New York Afro-Irish uprising of 1741. That one's finished, and then we are also doing one on the Amistad rebellion of 1839. These are all adaptations of things that I wrote. So one of the goals for this particular project was to bring the story of Benjamin Lay to younger readers. Okay, now, time for a children's book. In 2019, I got in touch with no advanced knowledge at all with a children's book writer named Michelle Markel, because she has done politically conscious children's books, for example, about a young girl who worked in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, the famous fire that killed so many people. I contacted her, asked her if she wanted to work with me on the Benjamin Lay project. She said she did. And then I had to find an artist. And I didn't have any idea how to do this. So I put out messages on Twitter and Facebook saying, I'm looking for an artist to illustrate the story of Benjamin Lay, and tell a little bit about him. And I heard from about 150 people. So I got a chance to look at all of these different styles, and so many of them were excellent. But the one I opted for in the end is a young artist named Sarah Bachman. And what I wanted, without knowing fully what I wanted until I saw all the options, was a mixture of folk art and magical realism. And there it is. That forest is alive, right? Benjamin Lay had an almost pantheistic view of the world, that God's divinity was within all living things. This is one reason why he was a vegetarian. But I think she captured him beautifully in this. The artwork is well underway. Michelle and I wrote the script. And this hopefully will bring the book to children. And then I decided to do a documentary film. Now, I had already done a documentary film, as Craig mentioned, with someone named Tony Buba, really distinguished filmmaker, independent film about working class lives. And this is John Rice here. That's Tony in the blue shirt. And here I am talking with a little person activist named Erin Pritchard, who was one of the leading authorities on dwarfism and its impact. Her view is that little people are not disabled, but the built environment disables them. That there are ways that this could be dealt with that would not be discriminatory. But anyway, we talked with her both before and after the play, and I must tell you that after the play, she said one of the things that was so meaningful to me. She said, this is the first time I've ever seen a little person actor after which I wasn't ashamed. She said, I can go out of here feeling proud. In other events, I was always worried, how are people looking at me? What are they thinking about me? So we definitely got something right. Now this, Tony Buba, how did I meet Tony Buba? I met Tony Buba because we went to the same demonstrations all the time. I kept bumping into him at demonstrations. And of course I knew the films he had done. He's done these really poignant films about his hometown, Braddock, Pennsylvania, which is a steel town that was deindustrialized. So he did these really powerful human portraits. We worked together on the Amistad film, Ghosts of Amistad. And we're going to do a play, a film this time, that the title of which is Becoming Benjamin Lay. So it's going to be about the relationship between Mark Povinelli and this historical character. Because Benjamin Lay is a hard person to inhabit. He's as Mark says, the man is an unbelievable challenge. Every step of the way, he's just really difficult. But part of the film is also going to be about what little people suffer in terms of discrimination in today's world. They are kind of a hidden minority. Most people haven't really thought very much about what their lives are like. So that's actually not the last project, because since Craig invited me to do this, I've got a new project. I'm going to do a critical edition of Benjamin Lay's book. I'm going to work with a scholar named Justin Meggitt. And how did I meet Justin? He turned up opening night to The Return of Benjamin Lay, and we started talking in the pub afterwards. He said, I'm really interested in Benjamin Lay. I said, yeah, tell me about it. So he's studying some of Benjamin Lay's theological ideas. He's a scholar of divinity at Cambridge University. And so maybe 3 months ago, 2 months ago, I wrote Justin, I said, let's do a modern, critical, scholarly edition of this book. He said, great, let's do it. Now, it turns out that we approached Cambridge University Press for two reasons. One is because they keep books in print forever. And secondly, because Benjamin Lay once wrote about Cambridge University, that how could a poor man like me ever imagine himself in a place like that? Well, they're going to publish the book, and I take that as a form of revenge, of class revenge. And you know what they promised me? The book will remain in print for no less than 450 years. That's a promise. Okay. Now, there is one more genre that you may have noticed I haven't mentioned, and that is the feature film. And we have had, I'd say, 6 or 7 serious nibbles by film companies, directors, producers, the whole business. And I think I finally figured out what's going on with all of them. They want to try to get the rights of the film, and then they want to convince Peter Dinklage to act the part of Benjamin Lay. You know him from Game of Thrones. Nobody's been able to do that yet, so the offers have dried up, but I haven't given up on it. And I actually think Mark Povinelli would be better, because he's an outstanding actor. So that's to come. Okay, so to summarize. Now, how did all this happen? There was no grand plan. It wasn't planned out in advance. It was disorderly. It happened in unexpected stages. You already heard about how the book became a play, that because of a conversation in a cafe. When I was doing a book event at the Quaker Meeting House in Abingdon, Pennsylvania, a former student of mine happened to be there, and she came up to me afterwards. She said, when does the children's book come out? She had 2 daughters who were 3 and 5 or something. And I thought, whoa, wow, maybe there should be a children's book. So there was no plan. It happened, and essentially one project enabled me to see the next project, which enabled me to see the next project. So it is really quite sequential. When the children's book and the documentary come out in 2025, I will have been at this for about 10 years, all these different Benjamin Lay projects. So I take the long view. I must admit, I did not undertake these projects, each one to reveal something new about Benjamin Lay's biography. Although I think maybe that has happened. I'll say more about that in a moment. I did it because I wanted to reach different publics. Okay? Now, a lot of people say, well, historians can't write for a general public. And I say, nonsense. The most important thing about writing for a broader audience is that you have to want to. Most people don't want to. They'd rather write for 12 specialists who read the same books every year. You have to want to. But the other key, and this is something that I've been very, very fortunate to experience, you have to find the right people to collaborate with. You know, so to work with Tony Buba, you know, they do retrospectives of his films in New York all the time. Naomi Wallace, who is one of those MacArthur Fellow geniuses, and who has won practically every award. David Lester, tremendously gifted artist. I've been fortunate, but I've also had people help me find the right people. So that's kind of the key. So that there is that common strategy of reaching as many people as possible. Now, different genres have different strengths. And it is kind of fascinating. I hadn't really thought about this until I started preparing for this presentation. After the first book, the biography, everything that's happened since is about the visual arts. Maybe that's me, maybe that's just a normal way to go. But the fullest account of Benjamin Lay's life and times in multiple contexts is The Fearless Benjamin Lay, the first book I wrote. That's the one that took the longest. It took about, I'd say, 4 years of full-time research. I'd say the best depiction of the creative process in rendering the life of Benjamin Lay will probably be the documentary film. We don't have enough of that yet, but Tony Buba is really good at that kind of thing. I think the deepest psychological portrait is the play. There are things that we could do in the play that I couldn't do in the biography because historians have to adhere to rules of evidence. You're much freer when you're writing a play, but it's so much harder writing a play. That was definitely the hardest of all the projects. And partly it's because I just had so much to learn. So I'm happy to say that many people are now out there reporting on the life of Benjamin Lay. Benjamin Lay has been on National Public Radio. He's been on the public broadcasting system. He's been in the New York Times. He's been in the Washington Post. He's been in the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's been on all kinds of podcasts, including some very funny ones. He is now a star on TikTok, where people call him Benjamin Slay or Short King. I like both of those. There are various Benjamin Lay clubs that have popped up in different places. I had nothing to do with any of them. One of them in Philadelphia is great. You know, if you've been to Philadelphia, you know that City Hall has a statue of William Penn up on top. The one political demand of the Benjamin Lay Club in Philadelphia is they take that down and put Benjamin Lay up there. And their motto is woke in 1738. So I'm also happy to say that these books have been translated into Catalan, French, Italian, Korean, Spanish, and Thai. There's a wonderful young activist in Thailand, part of the democracy movement, who is speaking a lot about the moral revolution of Benjamin Lay. And just this morning, literally this morning, I got a message from a scholar in Bogota, Colombia, who has discovered the discussion about Benjamin Lay and his ideas in 18th century Colombia. So there's a whole new coordinate in the circulation of his ideas. So how to finish? I'll just put it this way. Benjamin Lay is never going to be forgotten again if I have anything to do with it. Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to go back to any image that you saw up there, and I welcome your comments about this obsession.
And I just add that Marcus is obviously a performer himself, so he hit the time exactly on. We now have time for people to be able to ask questions.
Yeah.
Or offer comments. Hold on.
Really?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'd never heard a talk like this. And I've been around here for 34 years. You know, someone like yourself who's doing all kinds of, exploring different genres and see how they might meet different audiences in the public. But I was thinking that one of the challenges of being an academic is the tendency to focus on, say, factual accuracy, even in history, right? Now, you mentioned how the visual arts seem to be, you know, an arena where you seem to break those boundaries. But one of the things that I struggle with is how to capture emotional accuracy in academia, because academia is so compartmentalized. I wonder if your magnum opus could be something, some kind of work that where all these boundaries, compartments disappear.
Very interesting question, really. Thank you. I have been conscious of this issue of emotion. And I think Benjamin Lay, in a way, forced me to, because he was a man of such fierce passion. Right? I don't think I did full justice to that story in the biography, but I think I did get at the roots of the passion. See, the problem is, for historians at least, we don't have many documents about the interiority of people's lives. Now, Benjamin Lay does, in his book, talk about his own life quite a bit. And he's also a man who is full of anger, right? How we handle this in the play is a really interesting question. And I will add that Naomi Wallace said to me 10 times, if she said it to me once, "Marcus, we're not writing a history in this play. You've already done that, Marcus. We're doing something completely different." So the play, I think, would be our best example of what the emotional life of Benjamin Lay was like as we imagine it. Now, I think I've probably read all the sources, although you never know. Actually, somebody called me with a new source 4 months ago. It's fascinating. But if you're able to see the play, I'll be curious to know whether you think that got to some of the issues that you raise about the depth of the emotion, because that's what theater depends on. Right? It depends on emotion. It depends on watching the arc of a character develop over time and deal with certain emotional crises along the way. So I'll say we've tried, but I also like your idea that there might be a big project at the end of all this to combine all of the different kinds of insights. I hadn't considered that, and I thank you for that question. Yes, in the back, what is your name?
I'm Christine Yano from Anthropology. I was just wondering, thank you so much for this, and I am new to this subject and this person. I was just, to me, it is such a visual project as well, and a bodily project. And I'm wondering the degree to which he talked about his own body in his writings and the ways in which it might have shaped his own worldview, or it certainly shaped the way people saw him, but how did it shape his view of the world?
Yes, I think it was a profound part of his view of the world. And I do think, there's not a lot of evidence on this, but I do believe, and I say so in the book, that the discrimination and ridicule and mocking that Benjamin Lay got, even from other Quakers who are supposed to be tolerant and liberal, I think that fueled his identification with other people who had it worse. In other words, he hated all kinds of tyranny. He hated the tyranny of rich men. He hated the tyranny of enslavers. He hated the tyranny of patriarchs and the way that they treated women. So I do think that his own bodily experience shaped his worldview profoundly. How could it not? Now, there's not much evidence of what he thought about his own body. I mean, he does talk about the ridicule and how he would never allow that to defeat him. This guy did not lack confidence in himself. He said, he would say, he does say in his book, he says, yeah, they make fun of me. I'm little David, and I will bring down the Goliath of slavery. I mean, that's a hell of a thing to say. But I did find one newspaper article in which his name was not mentioned, but I could tell that it was him. Somebody wrote a newspaper article about a court case that was going on. And it was from a very conservative point of view, and the person who wrote it was probably an enslaver. And made a joke at the end about Benjamin Lay's body. Used a metaphor, as crooked as the body of Benjamin Lay. And Benjamin wrote back. He wrote back, and what he said was fascinating. He said, "We all have the bodies we have for many reasons. God gave them to us. But the important thing is not how your body looks. The importance is the character that you have in which you use that body." So basically, he switched the physical insult into a comment on moral integrity. And what he was basically saying is that I'll put my moral integrity up against yours any day. That's the only time we find him talking about his body. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, come on.
Thank you again for a talk like this. It's nice to see you again. My question is, it's clear that in your presentation, like, you didn't have a clear-cut plan to see how this was going to pan out. And in some respects, someone could see how, you have all these different adaptations of Benjamin Lay. Someone could have the reaction of, great, you brought him back to life. Your job is done, you're successful. And I can also see other people going, this is just the beginning of something new. So my question is, for you, is what does this hold for you now? You've been doing this for, like you said, almost a decade. And there was a moment in this presentation where you did get a little emotional.
Yeah.
So I'm curious now, what is this,
Yeah.
does this feel like, okay, I brought him back to life? Because you had a lot of really powerful moments when you
Yeah.
clearly did,
Yeah.
with all the other people involved too.
Yeah.
But I could also see,
Yeah.
no, this is just the beginning. So,
You know, it's a good question, Omar, and I think we were in a class together a few years ago, and I think we talked about, and at that time we talked about how every book has a secret emotional life, which never gets talked about. So, yeah, I've had some great satisfactions. I mean, some things have been very, very meaningful to me, but I recognize that the task is so vast, right? To bring somebody back from centuries of neglect, it's really hard. So I'm not tired of it yet. I'm not giving up yet. There may be other projects down the road. And of course, the thing with a play is that it's always renewed, right? We put on the play in these 3 cities in the first half of 2025. It's going to be different from what we did in London. We're different people. We know new things. And that's also complicated because my view of Benjamin Lay is not identical to Naomi Wallace's view of Benjamin Lay, which is not identical to Ron Daniels, the director's view of Benjamin Lay, which is not identical to Mark Povinelli's view of Benjamin Lay. So we gotta work that out, right? And I love that. I love that. And in the process, I've learned a lot about possibilities. I also have some fierce fights with the director. That's not what we meant. That's not the right reading of those few lines. And he said, well, here's why my version is better than yours. So, but that's just the creative process, right? So, but with regard to your question of what's next, I don't know. I'm going to write out the play and see where that takes us. Mark Povinelli says that he hopes he's acting in this play for the rest of his life. I hope he is too. It's funny how these things get around. But I think you just have to live with that ambiguity of some satisfactions, some of them small satisfactions. One man wrote me that he has Benjamin Lay tattooed on his left shoulder.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. I thought that was a great review. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. You got me thinking.
Make the impossible possible. That's awesome.
Listen,
Yeah, that was really fascinating to hear how those projects unfolded organically. But there were two things that you said that I wanted to pick up on. One was that the play was the hardest thing that you had written about Benjamin Lay. But then the other was when your playwright friend said, "This isn't history, Marcus." And what does she mean by that? And what constraints of history are assumed in such a statement? In what way is it not history, right?
What she wants to emphasize in saying that to me is that we have a different kind of imagination in writing the play, that we are freer. Now, she also knows that I'm like the living archive of the Benjamin Lay story, right? So I can say, no, that doesn't ring true, that does ring true. So here's the rule of thumb we use. Not everything in the play happened in the life of Benjamin Lay, but everything that's in the play could have happened given the character that we imagine him to be. Okay? So yeah, the play is hard because you don't know how good the writing is until you hear it come out of the mouth of an actor. And then you hear it and you think, oh no, that's not what I meant. And it can be just a very subtle thing. It could be, I mean, sitting through 3 weeks of rehearsals with the director and the actor was one of the most fascinating things. I mean, he would go over the emphasis on every syllable. And this is Shakespearean. He's a Shakespearean expert too, you have to know. So, yeah, and plus I had to learn so much to help to contribute to writing the play. But Naomi said something when we were in London in an interview, which I loved. She said, you know, Marcus and I went back and forth on this play so much, I can no longer tell who wrote which part. And that's a good thing. That feels good. Did I get to your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes, right here.
Thank you for this talk so much. I'm excited to bring him into my teaching.
Okay.
But I was just curious if you could say more about his wife.
I can. Believe me, I searched high and low. I searched all the Quaker records. Sarah Lay was a little bit older than Benjamin. She was a working class girl from Deptford, England, on the Thames River. Her father was like a painter. Benjamin was working as a sailor, went to the Deptford monthly meeting. I suspect he had deserted his ship. And he met her, and they fell in love. Sarah was an abolitionist herself. She was known for that. She was highly respected as an abolitionist, but she didn't have the constant problems with the Quaker hierarchy that he did. In fact, she was what's called an approved minister, which meant that she was able to travel as an official representative of Quakerism. And she was part of a very interesting radical network of Quaker women, headed by a woman named Susanna Morris from another Quaker abolitionist family. But Sarah died very young. She predeceased Benjamin by 24 years. And so there just wasn't very much to go on. But she always defended him when he got into trouble with the Quaker authorities, and she was a very able defender. But she had a quieter, less angry manner. Benjamin was a very angry man. And that's not good for Quakers. They don't like that. No, that creates discord. You know, harmony is a very prized value. And Benjamin at one point says, "Why am I a man of such strife and contention?" That's a good question. We'll try to answer that.
Okay, we'll go to Nat, and then we'll go Maya.
I'm thinking about this word demented, which is the wrong word. But in a lot of your work, Marcus, you talk about ordinary people in the docks and the fields doing extraordinary things. But Benjamin is not ordinary. And I think about also John Brown, who I think of as crazy, but in a good way. But he was not like us. And Benjamin kind of feels the same way to me.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen the play. I'm really looking forward to the reading. But I'm wondering how you feel about that. Like, how different is he? I'm thinking about Dr. King saying, the crazy people in our movement were very useful to us. But he did think they were crazy. And crazy is the wrong word, but was Benjamin?
Yeah, no, I get your point, Mari. Yeah, I think the comparison with John Brown is excellent, because they were both extreme Christian radicals. They both had a sense of, in the core of their beings, that they were right. John Brown certainly felt this way. And so did Benjamin Lay, but Benjamin Lay was completely committed to the principles of nonviolence. So, was he crazy? I guess the argument of my book, which you've read, is that no, he's not. He's the concatenation of a number of really unusual experiences. And the radical Quakerism, the seafaring, being exposed to the struggles of African peoples in Barbados, and then reading radical philosophy. So I think he expressed his radicalism in unusual ways, but I think he did it in highly rational ways, very calculated ways. When he came out of this meeting, having sprinkled the blood on the heads of those rich Quakers, he knew that everybody was going to be talking about his ideas. And you also need to know, in the radical tradition of which he was a part, this antinomian tradition, which stressed conscience against all forms of external authority, using eccentricity to advance your ideas was a very well accepted practice. He knew that, and he did it. He used his unusual body to make people pay attention. So,
Marcus, I'm going to ask you a footnote to that, because in terms of that business of being engaged as opposed to being an activist, one of the things I found most striking about this was the amount of time he put in and the ambivalence of his experience as a merchant in a slave-owning environment in the Caribbean. He put in the time, and the story I remember, which I'm sure Marcus is the one who found out, was dealing with shoplifting in his store, and what it was the slaves who were basically starving and trying to, and that's, I don't know if that's apocryphal. I think that
that's a
so
true
he
story.
really did put in the time. He went to the Caribbean as a merchant and basically worked in the center of a slavery economy.
Well, I think merchant gives the wrong impression. He was a tiny shopkeeper for people on the waterfront, sailors, artisans, enslaved people. But again, he put himself right there at the center of probably the wealthiest slave society in the world, and he took the side of the enslaved people. He became an abolitionist in 1718. As soon as he got there, he saw the horrors. But Mari, I don't think I've gotten to the gist of your question yet. Can you ask one more?
Well, I just feel I would like all of us to be as courageous.
To be
as courageous.
To be as courageous. There's so many things in this current moment that we should be throwing blood about. But we would get up and go about our business.
That's right.
So I guess my question is, how different is he from us?
Well,
and I think you answered it, that it does come out of a structure
yes.
That didn't require an extraordinary or different or odd, like personality sort of some kind.
Yeah.
That structure produced this human being.
Yeah. No, the structure is an important part of it, but I do think that a lot of it was just his personality. I've discovered, as I know you have discovered, that people in movements are just comfortable doing different sorts of things. There are some people who are comfortable doing extreme things, and he was one of them. And I can't help but think that the main reason for that was this deep inner certainty he had about the righteousness of his cause. And he was willing to die for it. No question about it. He was willing to die for it. He went to jail for it back in England. But yeah, can courage be taught?